Daniel had always found solace in solitude. After another soul-crushing week managing accounts at his corporate job, he packed his worn camping gear and drove 3 hours to Whispering Pines, a forest locals whispered about but rarely entered after dark. The September air carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth as he pitched his tent near a clearing. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver threads, barely illuminating the forest floor. Daniel built a small fire, watching sparks dance toward the stars, feeling the city's grip finally loosening from his shoulders. That's when he heard it, soft, melodic laughter that seemed to drip between the trees like smoke. His heart quickened. He wasn't afraid, exactly, but something primal stirred in his chest. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by the whisper of movement through undergrowth. Daniel stood slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Then he saw them. 2 amber eyes, glowing like captured moonlight, watching him from between the pines. "Hello." His voice sounded too loud in the hushed forest. The eyes blinked slowly and something moved. Not quite human, not quite animal. A figure emerged partially from the shadows. A young woman with delicate features and striking fox ears that twitched at every sound. A magnificent tail, thick and russet-colored, swayed behind her. Daniel's breath caught. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with sharp cheekbones and lips curved in an enigmatic smile. She wore what looked like flowing garments made from leaves and moss, barely concealing her live form. She tilted her head, studying him with intelligent, curious eyes. When she moved closer, her steps were silent, graceful as water flowing over stones. She circled his campfire slowly, never breaking eye contact, her tail brushing against his tent. I'm Daniel," he managed, feeling foolish but compelled to speak. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she gestured with one slender hand toward the deeper forest, beckoning. Her eyes held a question, an invitation. Every rational part of Daniel's mind screamed warnings. Don't follow strange creatures into dark forests. But something else, something deeper, urged him forward. He grabbed his flashlight and followed her into the trees. She moved like liquid shadow, always just ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure he followed. The forest seemed to open for her, branches parting naturally. They walked for perhaps 20 minutes before reaching a moonlit grove Daniel had never seen before. Ancient stones formed a rough circle, covered in moss and mysterious carvings. The fox girl settled onto a flat rock, patting the space beside her. Daniel sat, close enough to feel warmth radiating from her skin, to catch her scent, wild honey and pine. She reached out tentatively, touching his hand with fingers that felt surprisingly warm and human. Her eyes met his, and in them, Daniel saw loneliness matching his own. They sat together in comfortable silence until the first hints of dawn painted the sky, and she vanished like mist under morning sun. Daniel returned to Whispering Pines the following weekend, telling himself he needed the fresh air. He knew he was lying. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the mysterious fox girl who disappeared with the dawn. He set up camp in the same clearing, his hands moving mechanically through familiar motions while his eyes scanned the treeline. Would she come back? Had she been real at all? As twilight deepened into night, doubt gnawed at him. He'd nearly convinced himself it had been a vivid dream when that familiar laughter drifted through the darkness. Relief flooded through him as those amber eyes appeared between the pines. This time, she approached more confidently, settling cross-legged across the fire from him. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, making her seem to flicker between human and something more primal. Daniel offered her trail mix from his pack. She sniffed it cautiously, then selected a piece of dried mango, her eyes widening with delight at the sweetness. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Daniel would arrive Friday nights, and she would appear as darkness fell. They communicated through gestures, expressions, and gradually developing their own language of touch and glance. She'd trace symbols in the dirt, circles, spirals, waves, seeming to tell him stories he could almost understand. One cool October evening, Daniel brought his old acoustic guitar. When he played, she moved closer, her ears twitching with each note. She rested her head against his shoulder as he sang quietly, her tail wrapping around his waist in what felt like an embrace. The gesture was intimate, trusting, and it made his heart race. "I wish I knew your name," he whispered into her hair. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting firelight, and pressed her hand against his chest, then her own. Perhaps names didn't matter. Perhaps what they had transcended such things. As autumn deepened, Daniel noticed small changes around his campsite. Protective markings appeared carved into nearby trees, the same symbols she'd drawn in the dirt. Wildflowers he hadn't picked appeared arranged on a flat stone near his tent. Once, after a particularly cold night, he found his blanket covered in soft moss and leaves, as if she tried to keep him warm while he slept. The realization struck him one night as she dozed by the fire, her head in his lap while he stroked her hair. He was falling in love with her, this impossible, magical creature who couldn't or wouldn't speak, who disappeared each dawn, who lived between worlds. He traced the shell of her fox ear gently, and she stirred, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it longing? Sadness? She sat up slowly and, for the first time, leaned forward to press her forehead against his, her hands coming up to frame his face. In that moment, Daniel understood. She felt it too, this connection growing between like vines wrapping around ancient trees. November brought early winter storms to Whispering Pines. Daniel knew he should stay home, but the thought of her waiting for him in the cold and rain was unbearable. He packed extra blankets and arrived as thunder rumbled in the distance. She appeared earlier than usual, seeming agitated. Her ears lay flat against her head, and her tail lashed nervously. She kept glancing toward the darkening sky, making distressed sounds in the back of her throat. "It's okay," Daniel soothed, opening his tent flap. "You can wait in here until it passes." She'd never entered his tent before, always maintaining that invisible boundary. But tonight, as the first fat raindrops began falling, she hesitated only a moment before ducking inside. The tent suddenly felt impossibly small with both of them in it. The storm hit with savage intensity. Rain hammered the canvas while wind whipped through the trees, creating an eerie howling. Lightning flashed, illuminating her frightened face in stark white bursts. Without thinking, Daniel pulled her close, wrapping a blanket around both of them. She trembled against him, not from cold but from fear. He'd never seen her vulnerable before. She'd always been a mysterious, confident creature of the forest. Seeing her afraid made her somehow more real, more precious. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe." She burrowed deeper into his embrace, her face pressed against his neck, her breath warm against his skin. Her hands clutched his shirt, and he felt her gradually relaxing as his presence calmed her. The storm raged outside, but inside the tent, warmth bloomed between them. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Daniel lay back on his sleeping bag, and she curled against his side, her tail wrapping around his leg, her head on his chest. He could feel her heartbeat gradually syncing with his own. In the darkness, she shifted, lifting her head to look at him. Lightning flashed, and he saw something new in her eyes, desire mixed with decision. She leaned down slowly, giving him time to pull away, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, exploring. Daniel's hands came up to cradle her face, deepening the connection. She made a soft sound, almost a purr, and pressed closer, her body aligning with his. The kiss grew more urgent, more heated. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she didn't retreat. Instead, she began trailing kisses along his jaw, down his neck, her hands sliding under his shirt to feel the warmth of his skin. Daniel groaned softly, his own hands exploring the curve of her back, feeling where soft skin gave way to the base of her tail. "Are you sure?" he whispered hoarsely. In answer, she pulled him closer, guiding his hands to where her makeshift garments fastened, giving permission he hadn't dared hope for. Daniel woke to pale dawnlight filtering through the tent fabric. For the first heartbeat, he expected to be alone as always. Then he felt the warm weight against his side, the soft fur of her tail draped across his stomach. She was still there. He hardly dared breathe, afraid movement might break whatever spell had allowed her to stay past sunrise. Her head rested on his bare chest, one hand curled against his heart. In sleep, her fox ears drooped softly, and she looked achingly vulnerable. Last night had been beyond anything Daniel had experienced. a connection both physical and transcendent, as if their souls had recognized each other across the boundary between human and whatever magical thing she was. She'd been both fierce and tender, guiding him with touches and sounds, showing him pleasure that seemed to blur the lines between their two worlds. As sunlight strengthened, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment confusion flickered there, as if she too was surprised to find herself still present in daylight. Then understanding dawned, followed by something that looked like grief. She sat up abruptly, the blanket falling away, and crawled to the tent entrance. She pushed the flap aside and froze. Daniel could see her hand, extended into the morning light, beginning to fade slightly, becoming translucent around the edges. "No," he breathed, understanding flooding through him with cold certainty. She pulled her hand back quickly, and the solidity returned. She turned to him in tears, the first he'd seen her shed, tracked down her cheeks. She gestured frantically, pointing at herself, then at the forest, then at the sunlight, then back to herself, shaking her head. "You're bound to the forest," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "You can only exist during the night." She nodded miserably, crawling back to him. She took his face in her hands, pressing their foreheads together, trying desperately to communicate. Her hands moved rapidly, touching her chest, touching his, gesturing to the tent's interior, to the darkness they'd shared. Daniel understood. In the darkness, in the shelter of night and tent, she could stay. But she couldn't leave the forest, couldn't walk in daylight, couldn't follow him back to his world. "Then I'll stay," he said, surprising himself. "I'll stay here with you." She pulled back, shaking her head emphatically. She gestured at him, at the tent entrance leading to the wider world, making pushing motions. She wanted him to live his full life, not trap himself in eternal night for her sake. "I don't care," Daniel insisted, pulling her close. "Every weekend, every vacation, every moment I can, I'll come back. Always." She clutched him tightly, and he felt wetness on his shoulder where she pressed her face. They stayed that way as the day brightened outside, existing in their small bubble of darkness, stealing precious hours before he would have to leave, and she would have to retreat into the depths of the forest to wait for night's return. Winter came early to Whispering Pines. Daniel arrived every weekend regardless of weather, his colleagues thinking him mad for camping in such conditions. Let them think what they wanted. None of them had what he had. Their nights together developed a rhythm, a dance between worlds. She taught him to read the forest language, the warnings in certain bird calls, the promises in how leaves fell. He brought her small gifts from his world. Chocolate that delighted her, soft fabric she'd wrap around herself, books he'd read aloud by firelight, even though she couldn't understand the words, but seemed to love the sound of his voice. They made love under star-scattered skies and in the sheltering darkness of his tent, learning each other's bodies with reverent attention. Afterward, she'd curl against him, her tail wrapped around them both, and he'd stroke her ears until she purred contentedly. But Daniel noticed changes. Sometimes she seemed weaker, more translucent even in darkness. The forest itself felt different. Trees were being cleared at its edges, roads planned. He heard construction equipment in the distance during daylight hours. One December night, as snowflakes drifted through the pines, she seemed particularly somber. She pulled him to their special grove, to the stone circle. In the snow, she drew elaborate symbols, gesturing urgently. An elderly woman's voice startled them both. "So it's true. The fox spirit has taken a lover." They spun to find an old woman from the village, wrapped in furs, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. Her eyes held knowledge that seemed ancient. "Please." Daniel stepped forward protectively. "Don't. I'm not here to harm her, boy." The woman's expression softened. "I'm here to warn you both. The forest is dying. Development comes. When the old trees fall, the spirits will fade. She'll have perhaps one more spring." The fox girl's ears drooped, confirming what Daniel had feared. She was tied not just to the forest, but to its magic, and that magic was being slowly destroyed by progress. "There must be something," Daniel began desperately. "There is one way," the old woman said slowly. "A spirit can become human, but the price is memories. She would forget what she was, forget the magic, forget you. She could live in your world, but would no longer be herself. The fox girl looked at Daniel, amber eyes pleading with him not to ask this of her. He understood. She'd rather fade as herself and exist as someone new than we have now, Daniel said firmly, pulling her close. Every moment until we can't anymore. The old woman nodded approvingly and disappeared into the trees, leaving them alone with their precious, limited time. That night, as Daniel held her close, he felt something press into his hand. He looked down to find a single brilliant amber stone, warm as living flesh, glowing faintly. A piece of her, to carry always. "I'll never forget you," he whispered against her hair as snow fell softly around them. "Not in this life or any other." She pressed closer, and in the darkness, they made promises that transcended words, to love fully in the time they had, to treasure each stolen night, to make their impossible romance matter even as the world conspired to end it. When spring came, he would face losing her. But tonight, and for as many nights as the forest allowed, she was his, and he was hers, and that would have to be enough.